Okay, so hi, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Pedro, and today it's a pleasure for us to host Kat Strickson from Liverpool John Moores University in the UK, and she's going to be talking about her talk entitled "A Deep Dive into Dinosaur Heteropody." So for people that have been to eoPERCS seminars before, you're familiar with the format, but we usually start with this 5 minutes welcome and announcement slides. Then we proceed to the talk, and after the talk, we have a moderated Q&A session of about 10 minutes, which is followed by a tea time, which is a good time for us to talk with the speaker and talk about the research and career and etc. First reminder that you can make the questions about the talk to Kat via chat, and also if you raise your hand, you can do it by speaking. So just a little bit of housekeeping. With eoPERCS value the participation of everyone interested in the paleosciences, and we remember people to abide by our code of conduct. People that receive that are in our mailing list and receive the link for the talks should all abide by our code of conduct. So if you ended up in this talk without doing so, please go to our website and do it. People shouldn't be able to unmute themselves during the talk, but if for some reason you are able to unmute yourself, please remain muted during the talk. And second reminder about the questions. You can both send the questions via chat, sending them to our questions host today, that is Remat, or by raising your hand using, it depends on the Zoom version, but you can find the raise your hand option in the bar below, and you can unmute you and you can ask the question directly. We use Zoom captions, and you can both hide or choose to hide or show the captions by pressing the little CC button below. It also varies depending on the Zoom version, but it usually in the bar below, maybe in the 3 dots, searching for more options, and so on. We are always looking for nominations for next talks. So if you do know an early career researcher that works in any paleo field that you'd like to nominate, please go to our website and do it using the nomination form. And finally, you should be seeing in the chat in a few seconds our form for demographic information. So we have a survey that is anonymous, optional, but is also encouraged by us, and in which you can provide some demographic information that is very valuable for us. So finally, introducing Kat. She did her undergrad at Nottingham Trent University in the UK, followed by a master's in the University of Bristol, and then a PhD at Liverpool John Moores University, and is currently an independent researcher in the UK. So welcome, Kat, and you can take the screen share and start the talk.
Amazing, thank you, Pedro. So I'm just going to see if this screen share works for me again. Let me know, Pedro, if it is, because I am stuck. The audience won't know this, but I am stuck in the browser version of Zoom. Okay. So sometimes things just don't work, and you just have to get on with it. Is this working?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we can see the talk.
Fantastic. Okay, amazing. I'll just get on with it then. Preface before I start, I have caught whatever the version of Freshers Flu is when everyone stops taking off their masks in the end of lockdown. So have a Pacific parrot in the other room, and sometimes she throws a hissy fit when I'm not there. So that'll be what that is. Other than that, this is my talk, Deep Dive into Dinosaur Heteropody. I'm Dr. Catherine Strickson from Liverpool John Moores University, now independent / unemployed. Please give me a postdoc. Let's get on with explaining what Dinosaur Heteropody is, why I'm interested in it, and what we can learn by having a look at why it exists and why it's the way it is. So what is heteropody as a concept? So heteropody is just a word for the phenomenon of foot size difference between the manus and the pes, the forefoot and the hindfoot. And usually when we talk about heteropody in the context of sauropod dinosaurs, which is what I'm going to be mainly focusing on my questions from, we're talking about extreme heteropody, which is just what it sounds, and it's an extreme version of this foot size difference. And this is exemplified in sauropod trackways, where you can clearly see the impressions left from feet, and the forefoot and the hind foot tend to be very different sizes, with the forefoot considerably smaller. And this is partially this is also partially seen in dinosaur osteology. You can see sauropod hindfoot and forefoot, the way that people oppose them, and the way that we've reconstructed them. They do have very different structures, and with the forefoot being more of a pillar shape, which you wouldn't necessarily expect for something of a sauropod's mass, and the hind feet tend to being more semi-digitigrade posture, sort of like an elephant or a rhino relying on a fatty foot pad. These heteropody is unusual in modern terrestrial quadrupeds. It's much more common in animals that are, let's say, fossorial or arboreal, or semi-aquatic, so a beaver that uses its hind feet for paddling, or a mole which has very developed musculature in its forearms and much larger forefeet for digging. So yeah, obviously sauropods have a unique morphology, which lends themselves to this sort of study. They're not just their feet at different sizes as being weird, but they are just generally quite a weird animal. Just in the concept of just general geological time, that just their unprecedented body size, their long necks and long tails, and the fact that they have evolved from bipedal ancestry, as all quadrupedal dinosaurs have, which leaves them with no extant analogs for exactly the way that they developed, or their size, or just about a lot of the way that their morphology works. But yeah, when we're looking at heteropody and the difference in foot size, we tend to use heteropody index as an area proxy. And what this means is when you look at a footprint, quite often the area, the impression of the foot is not clear. Obviously, that's affected by substrate, by the way the animal was moving, their gait in life, and a bunch of other issues. So ichnologists tend to use heteropody index as a quick and dirty way of getting an area proxy for trackways. So that would be length times width, a simple like square estimate of foot area. And heteropody is this measure, and is manner size as a percentage of PERCS size. I think I got that right. So yeah, we'll come to that in a bit, but when you see that term again, you'll know what that means, hopefully. And this varies across species. So why have different size feet in the first place? What's the purpose of this? Sauropods don't look like from the outset that they're semi-aquatic or arboreal fossorial that have a really hard time digging anywhere. They wouldn't have a good time climbing trees. There's been a couple of things pushed out there about possibly using their forefeet for punting across the bottom of lakes. I don't quite buy into this, but it is out there. It is a thing that some people think. What I'm looking at mainly here today is pressure equalization. So the idea that the forefoot and the hindfoot are different sizes to cope with the center of mass being offset. So towards the front, if the center of mass is towards the back of the animal, if you have a smaller forefoot, you then still have equal pressures underfoot despite the offset center of mass. And if this is the case, and if this is a common thing in tetrapods, it'd be quite a big deal. And also it helped to explain a couple of phenomena in different trackway preservation. It's also possible that this is just a holdover from their bipedal ancestry. So when sauropods evolved from bipeds, their hind feet, the ancestors' hind feet were doing all the supporting of the body. So they'd already evolved some structures to cope with this, and their forefeet were not doing this. And they evolved separately into support structures and methods and feet used to walk instead of for other mechanisms. So perhaps this is why they're different shapes and sizes, perhaps. And this possibly combines with like the result of structural and functional differences in the manus and pairs. Maybe they're just different structures. Maybe they've worked out different solutions, the same problem of supporting the huge mass of sauropod bodies. Perhaps they're there for different functions. Perhaps they offset it in different ways. Whole lot of questions, whole lot of possibilities, but we're going to be focusing on pressure equalization. So just a little aside here, just to have a look at the different Heteropody and sauropod dinosaurs is Nops spondylis. I've pronounced that horribly, but as you can see here, the forefoot and the hindfoot in these early sauropods are very different sizes. And on the right here, we have a fossil trackway, just to demonstrate a similar phenomenon. Okay, so this pressure equalization idea, what do I mean by it? Just in a more visual form. This is based on a figure from Henderson 2006, Burley Gates, which I didn't realize was a pun until last year. So that says something about me, I think. In this diagram here, the blue rectangle represents an animal's trunk. The green triangles represent animals' feet, and the red represents the animal's center of mass, so where the direction of the center of mass is. So right here, you can see the center of mass is central to the trunk, and the feet are equidistant to the center of mass. And in this arrangement, you would have an animal with a symmetrical load underfoot, equal areas, equal stress, because pressure equals force over area. And that same concept can be carried through to here. So if you have pressure, a lot of the center of mass asymmetrically in one direction, you have equal areas but unequal stress. So this will cause possible damage to the overloaded foot, and it might be beneficial to have asymmetrical load, unequal areas, and equal stress. So if this is the case, if this is what's happening, if this is the cause of extreme heteropody, you would expect heteropody, so foot size difference, to be correlated with center of mass position. And that's what we're going forward here. So center of mass research in dinosaurs, the main thing that we're going from here is the work of Bates et al. In 2016, looking at the two cranial shifts in center of mass position throughout sauropodomorph evolution. So there are two main moments in which center of mass moved towards the head, and the onset of quadrupedalism, and in the evolution of titanosauriforms, which are the larger micronarians that dominated the Cretaceous. And these are tight enlargements of the neck. So when the neck gets longer, this is associated with center of mass shifts in a cranial direction. So if we know that, we can have a look at different sauropod trackways and how this relates, whether heteropody is associated with these trends, perhaps. Center of mass shifts in ornithischians, also going to have a little note here. They largely retain posterior position, although this is debated, and with an anterior shift in ceratopsians, with their large head with horns and frills. In extant animals, horns are negligible, but muscles associated with behaviors such as like fighting over competition, for sexual competition, have been associated with cranial shifts in center of mass as muscle buildup increases towards the front of the animal compared to the back. Okay. So sorry if I'm talking too fast. I will try to control myself. It's just a habit of mine. So to answer this question of whether pressure equalization is correlated with heteropody, we went into a couple of little smaller questions. So do underfoot forces and pressures indicate a pressure equalization mechanism? So if we look at extant animals, extant tetrapods, do we see a correlation between the center of mass and force on the hind foot and the force between the forefoot and the hind foot, and pressure differences, and how this relates? Can skeletal surface area predict in vivo foot surface area? So how well can we extrapolate back and forth between footprints and skeletons and vice versa? Make our job easier with identifying track makers, looking at what kind of footprint a dinosaur, for example, would make, just from its osteological remains. And also it would help with gathering quick and easy data from skeletal collections in museums rather than do a lot of live animal studies. And for how do these answers apply to extreme heteropody in dinosaurs? Is there a correlation between pressure, underfoot pressure, and center of mass in extant animals? And how does this relate mechanism? Is there something else going on? Okay. So here I'm just going to take a little look at heteropody index, just so you're reminded. Heteropody index is minus size as percentage of PERCS size, and we're going to be coming across that quite a lot here. So heteropody index of 100 equals PERCS of the same size as the manus. Heteropody index of 50, the PERCS is twice as big. Heteropody index of 150, the manus is twice as big as the PERCS. And obviously, when you're looking at underfoot pressure and underfoot foot surface area, you have to consider the different postures of different animals, whether it's unguligrade, plantigrade, digitigrade, semi-digitigrade. So we took measurements from when we took measurements from skeletal animals and live animals, we made sure we had like the right lengths, whether it be digit length, whole foot length for plantigrade, etc. One thing I will note here, which is important, which I'm bringing up here, is carpal width, which is something we're using here as a proxy for the minimum width that the fingers can be splayed. So in traditional Heteropody usage, length times width is how you measure a footprint. And if we're going to be looking at this from skeletons, we can get a much more, we thought we can get a much more accurate measure because a length times width as area is affected by the pose of the foot, as you can see here with this hippo foot. The toes are quite splayed. Whereas if you take the minimum distance at the end of the fingers, at the proximal end of the fingers, you get this situation where you have the minimal length just because the bones can't go any closer together. And so we took a look at methods of Heteropody because we thought maybe this could be made easier for us. Length times width length times width is a Heteropody proxy. So compared to forefoot, there's a minus as a percentage of pairs for a bunch of different animals, compared to pi times radius squared, which is of course the area of a circle, and length times carpal width, which is the minimum distance it can be fingers can be splayed. And what we found here was that length times carpal width is much more accurate than either of the ones before. Length times width, which is the traditional usage, very, very bad for a lot of things, especially ungulates, which were caught up here in pi times radius squared. The orange here on the pie chart represents the accuracy. So the percentage error. So when you measure Heteropody in ungulates, it's very accurate compared to the actual area, which we worked out by using a MATLAB script. We can get this available for you guys if you want to have a look at it afterwards. But for ungulates, the area of a circle is a much more accurate area proxy. Not so much for the other animals, although the closer you are, like the problem with ungulates using the square method is that there's a lot of extra area there with a square that just isn't accounted for. But for everything where length and width was much more accurate than pi times radius squared, length times carpal width was much more accurate. So if you want to calculate area of a underfoot surface area, if it's obvious. So from here, we worked out, we sought to find out whether there's a link between foot surface area in just skeletal foot and with the soft tissue, and how whether it could be used in like identifying trap makers, whether it'd help us extrapolate back and forth, answer this question between Heteropody and center of mass in like living animals and dinosaurs, and how well they could be looked back and forth. So here we have a hippo foot, as we've seen before. A lot of these are the same hippo foot because I just like the model. And so here we have it in the live pose, which I said here, which is the sort of this is from a CT scan. And here in B we have the area of the foot that we use for the silhouette. We used MATLAB to create this top-down silhouettes from 3D models segmented for CT scans. And here you can see we've got the upward view, the bird's eye view of the foot, the skeleton and the skin. And we also had a version with bones laid flat in this case, just for more objectivity. And then from C and D here, you can see this is what the silhouettes look like of the posed foot. And red here, the red/orange color represents the alpha shape of the silhouette. So the minimum area that it could be said to take up. The minimum distance between all the points in the point cloud. And from this, we were able to determine that yes, there is quite a strong correlation between skeletal foot surface area and skin on foot surface area. Very predictable. 1.767 times, I believe, was the hindfoot to the forefoot. So yeah, sorry, with both feet, and the forelimb and the hind limb slightly different. But the point is here that we could then use this later on when looking at estimating sort of like what a footprint from skeletal remains of a dinosaur would look like, which was useful for me later on. So you can read about that in my Journal of Anatomy paper out in 2019, so a couple of years ago before the plague. There we go. So from there, with this information, we then got a lot of skeletal data from Liverpool World Museum and from the literature. Digitized 57 different animal skeletons with photogrammetry and with laser scans. We took foot measurements as the ones I listed before, the digit length, the phalangeal length, pose width, carpal width, all that good stuff. And then we got convex hulls in a neutral pose from this and to determine the center of mass. And what the results were as follows. So this is the Heteropody index as regards each posture. So for a digitigrade animal, it'll be like length times carpal width of the digits and so on with the different postures. And on the bottom is center of mass. And as you can see, there's no general trend across these tetrapods. There's no silver bullet. There's no like, oh yes, center of mass is correlated with Heteropody index here. It does seem to be the case here, possibly, that cursorial mammals do show somewhat of a trend. There's a huge cluster in the middle of cursorial mammals with a center of mass around 50 to 60% from distance from the hip to the shoulder, and Heteropody index are around 100 to 120%. So this shows that when there's cursorial mammals and they have equal foot size, then to have it's very central to the trunk center of mass, and this makes sense. They're walking a lot. They have to run terrestrially, basically to function. Other animals that didn't fit this tended to be more semi-aquatic, or as you can see here, like Tamandua are boreal. But semi-aquatic animals on their own did show a trend too. Although this seems to be largely because I suspect this is largely driven by the fact that a lot of semi-aquatic animals use their hind feet to paddle. So take with that what you will. Moving on to underfoot force and pressures, not just the differences in foot size, but the actual forces at play here and how they work out. Here is a nice little tapir stepping on a pressure mat in Blackpool Zoo. We gathered a lot of data like this from the literature and both by ourselves, using high-speed camera and MATLAB. We combined this data. We combined this data with the literature data on foot pressure and force, using peak vertical force for the hind foot and the forefoot to create this sort of heteropody. This Manners force as a percentage of hind foot force, and so on, and to see whether that correlated with heteropody. So we're moving from skeletons into animals just out in their daily life. And it was kind of conclusive, basically. Not much can be said for this. There's a little bit more of a trend generally than you'd see in the last one, but no, nothing to really confirm. So inconclusive, probably not. From this and from the previous bit with the skeletons, I think we can say pretty much for certain there's no trend across tetrapods for a correlation between foot pressure and between center of mass and heteropody. So it's not a general trend. Maybe there's something going on in cursorial mammals, but that needs follow-up. And I would like to do that follow-up if I have the money. So then we're going to move on to dinosaurs, where we started all this. We come full circle. And we're here looking at Bates et al. 2016, which is looking at the whole body center of mass in sauropodomorphs and the shifts and the craniad shifts in center of mass in the evolution of quadrupedality in sauropodomorphs and the evolution of the titanosauriforms. So what we did here is we took this data from Bates, and he's just up the road at University of Liverpool. Wasn't hard to get contact with him, thankfully. We got his raw data, and then we looked at trackways from a bunch of different the Heteropody indexes from these studies. And the theory here was we would imagine if Heteropody and center of mass were correlated, even if they aren't in tetrapods generally, maybe they're correlated in sauropods. And the only way we could see this really is by looking at trackways and seeing if there is a match shift, if the shifts in center of mass seen in this study are matched with shifts in a heteropody that you would expect in the fossil track record. So here we go. We took a lot of trackway data. This is heteropody, so I remember Manus as a percentage of pairs for a bunch of different sauropod trackways across time. At first, I looked at this and thought, oh, look, 2 peaks, but no. Actually, there's a 50 million year difference between the peaks in center of mass and peaks in heteropody seen here. If you can even call them peaks, which really mathematically are they? Really what was going on here, as I discovered when I did run like a nice little analysis, this is fossil bias. So many more trackways are preserved in certain time bins because that's just where all the good sites are. And then this works out in just a larger range of different heteropodies being found at these different sites, and that skews the data. So no correlation as far as we can see. Center of mass looking like not connected to heteropody in sauropods either. So what are the implications of this? If there's no universal pressure equalization mechanism, this does fit with high pressure explanations for trackways. So things like Manus-only trackways, which are a phenomenon in the fossil track record. One of the explanations for these is that there's just higher pressure underfoot in the forefoot. There are pairs-only trackways as well, which would go against this, but also, yeah, it's possible that this fits more with what we find in the fossil record. But so why have extreme heteropody at all, if it's not to equalize underfoot pressure? Because obviously, if you got more pressure on one side than not, it seems counterintuitive, right? Maybe the hind foot is just designed to bear more weight. Maybe equalization is not necessary. That's just it works fine the way it is. You know, with evolution, things aren't necessarily perfected. They're just good enough to continue. And what we saw before with like elephants, they would tend to be on the side where the Manus tend to be a bit larger, and they don't need necessarily to be able to, like, you know, be very well balanced and run very fast because they're massive. They're not in danger of being chased as much as some other animals. Perhaps this is to do then with the phylogenetic history. As we said before, no extant animal has evolved to be from bipeds to quadrupeds. So we have no living model to look at for this. Perhaps in the evolution from bipedal animals to quadrupedal sauropods, especially ones with such massive size, the forefoot and the hindfoot just had different ways of dealing with this, especially because the hindfoot was coping with so we're asking the wrong questions here. We're asking what could be the cause of this extreme heteropody? What mechanical explanation could there be for this? Rather than asking, you know, what resulting in this, like, where did it come from? How did we get here? Rather than what mechanical explanation is there for now? Where did it come from? So I'm suspect right now, and I would love the money to work this out because I'm really excited about this, is that this is an artifact of phylogenetic history of sauropods. So going from like bipedal ancestors to facultative quadrupeds to obligate massive quadrupeds. In that shift, we developed this forefoot, which is pillar-like, and the back foot, which is much more semi-digitigrade, like an elephant or a rhino. And this is quite unique to have two very different postures, especially when they both have to cope with the same issue of really large body mass. You think they'd have a similar solution. So I would really, really like to look at the evolutionary history of this, the evolutionary rates of the forefoot and the hindfoot, and compare them to work out if they evolved at different speeds. If there's different functional stuff going on here with how to support the weight and how that all works out. So that's what I'm really, really nerding out over right now, looking at all the data I've got already. And I was further inspired about this by this paper called by Janelle et al., which I really, really like. I probably pronounced that name wrong, actually. Janelle, and then which was looking at the range of motion and possible posture of a Rhoetosaurus foot, and worked out basically that it would have been most likely semi-digitigrade, as I said, like an elephant. And and I'd love to do similar stuff with this on the forefoot and the hindfoot of different animals and work out like what the different postures are, like what's the different range of motion, how functionally do they differ, not just to different dinosaurs, but to each other between the forefoot and the hindfoot, and compare that to how differently they evolve. How did we get here from, how did this transition from bipeds to quadrupeds and work out in the evolution of the feet, which remember are the divine, like if it's quadruped and biped, that's the definition of the different locomotion group. I'm really interested in how that happened and what the functional demands were, how they were met, and how they were met differently between the forefoot and the hindfoot, not just differently between different taxa. So here's a little thingy I made to sort of get myself to go on for like funding grants and stuff. So if you like this kind of research, if you want a real answer to this presentation, which, as you might have noticed, started with a fairly clear-cut question and ended on, I'm still trying to find out, can you give me money? Well, I am looking for a postdoc right now. So if you want an answer, support your local paleontologists. So in conclusion, thank you all for listening. Thank you to eoPERCS for having me. Thank you to Pedro. And just an acknowledgement here. I managed to do this work with an LGMU scholarship, as well as a little acting gig I had with a cooperative, which gave me the money I needed to get through my final year because my funding ran out. The Structure and Motion Lab, the Royal Veterinary College, they provided us a lot of CT scans and awesome data and lovely feedback. The Liverpool World Museum that lets me go in there and take pictures for multiple days of their collections, basically left me to my own devices, which I really appreciate. The Florida Museum of Natural History, which helped me out with frog CT scans. The Carl Gans Fund gave me a grant to attend ICVM, which was one of the best conferences I've ever been to. And my GoFundMe backers, which helped me pay for my final year of tuition when I couldn't afford it. And also for my friends Ryan Marek and Karen Moyes, who are basically the only reason I'm still sane after all of this. You know, a PhD is hard work and you need a good support network, and they were there for me. So there we go. I think that's it for now. So yes, that's the end. So I will leave this up, I suppose. And I will just pause it here, I suppose.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kat. It was an amazing talk. Really enjoyed it. So yeah, I think just another reminder to people that they can send their questions via chat or by raising their hands. So so far I've got some questions already. So the first one was a great talk. And what other animals has the most heteropody feet, if you know?
What modern animals?
Yeah, what modern
well, when I
animal?
was looking, a kangaroo. That's for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
You know, like,
that's
but
true.
like then that's not really fair because they're sort of tripeds. Like if you look at the way that when they're not hopping, they walk using their tripeds, like pentapeds, because they walk using their tail as well. Otherwise, I'd like the beaver's a good example, but then that's because of the paddling, and it's got a very fleshy tail as
Yeah,
well.
that's true.
So it does tend to be animals that have very different locomotory styles and locomotory needs. Like giant anteater, its four feet are just basically claws. Not very useful for running away. I was actually quite surprised, like the elephants tend to be so front heavy with the size of their forefeet. I suppose it's just to support the large head. But yeah, that was also another thing that surprised me during this research.
Cool. So another question is, why do you think the relationship between skeletal size and skin surface area is different between hind feet and forward feet? I'm going to drop this in the chat as well for you to read. Yeah.
So there were bird feet included in that study. So when you're looking at the hind feet alone, that also includes bird feet. And I think maybe that's a flaw with what we did. We should have just done a separate study with birds and then one with like general general tetrapods and quadrupeds, because birds have very they're very sort of a gristly. That's a terrible word for it. But like the feet, like bird feet, are not very muscular. Like the muscles in a bird's leg are very high up. The feet tend to just be like the bone in the joints, which doesn't help. There's a little bit on this. I write extensively about this in the paper itself. But generally, I think the issue there is with bird feet being quite different. Yes.
Yeah. So another question that came in is, does a substrate that the footprint was preserved in matter for your analysis? And can that noticeably impact the size or shape of the footprints?
Yeah, it could. I mean, there's no at a certain point. There's no getting around that. Generally, like if you're looking at Heteropody, so you're getting like the forefoot and the hindfoot, you would assume, and that assume is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, that the same sort of pressures and like warping that the substrate would give it would impact the same as the forefoot and the hindfoot. But that is a problem if the underfoot pressure is significantly different, because then if you've got a higher pressure under the forefoot, obviously it's going to warp the print more. With this study that we did, we gathered a lot of data from different sources. It's very hard to verify how much that is changing without going on for months and months. But yes is the answer to that. I think it could have a significant effect.
Yeah, makes sense. So just reminding people again that you can ask questions via the chat. So one thing that
am I allowed to stop sharing this screen, by the way, just so I can see the Zoom call again?
I think you can leave the. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see what happens. Where's my screen gone?
Okay.
It disappeared then. Am I back? No, I'm not back. Here we go.
No, yeah.
I'll put my face back on here.
Oh, no, it is. Now it's here.
Yeah.
So, oops. Yeah. So just before we proceed, I don't know if I have any other questions, but if people have any other questions, you can wait a few seconds. But in the meantime, I have a question myself. I was wondering when you said that maybe Heteropody is like just determined by phylogenetic history. Have you had the chance to do a quick to map this on the phylogeny, for example, and do a quick phylogenetic signal test to see if it's strong or not?
No, and that was actually what I want to do next.
Okay.
So right now, unfortunately, because I don't have a postdoc, I have quite a demanding full-time job right now. So there's only so much you can do in the meantime. So if one of my grants goes through, that will be the first thing I do.
Okay. Nice.
Generally, it tends to be a lot more messy than we were imagining when we first set out. So when we first set out to look at the sort of a possible correlation between like underfoot pressure and center of mass, it seemed like fairly straightforward. But actually, like what we ended up looking at is a lot of variation in the different groups as well. So what I'd expect is a lot messier than I sort of made it sound at the end of that. But we'll see. I'll have a look at that when I have some funding. Yeah,
makes sense. I'm looking forward to see the results as well. Very interesting.
Me too, man. Me too.
So I think, I don't know, we have another question. So question is, let's drop this in the chat as well. Chat here. Okay. The question is, could variation in amount of time animals spend lying down or resting influence the importance of weight-bearing limbs?
I think so. I mean, the more demand there is for like sort of cursoriality, the more the demand on the limbs is going to matter. I think, I mean, every tetrapod has to sleep at some point. I don't know if lying down is really the issue here, because they all do a fair bit of it. Like if you've ever seen a cursorial animal in a zoo, they spend most of their day sleeping anyway. No, I think we're more, when you're looking at variation in this, it's more to do with how much they actually spend, how much of their actual like daily locomotion stuff is spent on land compared to like doing special activities such as like foraging in underground, or like burrowing or swimming. As I say, so semi-aquatic animals were very different for that trend. They had a different sort of trend to the rest of they didn't cluster like all the cursorial animals did. I would love to have a look at that. I don't know how you'd be able to quantify how much time an animal spends lying down without like doing a long observational studies of all of them, but it would be interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I think that was all. I don't see any other question coming. So since we already have this next slide up, so thank you very much, Kat, for the talk. It was amazing. I really hope you manage to do the next steps and have money for that. So
thank you very much.
sorry. So yeah, let's proceed. So sorry about that. And next week, please join us for Jihad Rashid talk from the University of Casablanca, Morocco. And she's been talking about tracking climate variability and environmental changes of carbonate mountain sediments in the Western Mediterranean over the last 14,000 years. So next, we're gonna have tea time. So please join us for talking about more about the talk itself, about Kat's research and research path and what she wants to do next. And it's also a nice opportunity to talk to old friends or meet new ones, and also to discuss with people with different backgrounds in the paleosciences. And then you can go back to your regular scheduled day. So before we go to tea time, we'll have a short 2-minute break. So I'm going to start the time here and hope to see you all during tea time. So thank you. See you.